What is up, guys? I got the winner of the chain guide. That is going to be going to B-Mountain Bike, that subscriber. So hit me up. You got a awesome brand new one-up chain guide coming your way free of charge. The two helmets are going to be picked in about a week and a half. So once again, if you're not already subscribed, make sure to do that and you will be entered to win the raffle for the helmet. Once again, B-Mountain Bike, you are the winner for the chain guide. Anyways, thanks for your patience. On to the video. It was August 2014 when Specialized unveiled what was going to be their new downhill bike for 2015, the 27.5 Demo S-Works. As a bike nerd and downhill racer myself, I still remember the jaw-dropping level of envy I felt looking at this thing. There has been a handful of bike launches that have stuck with me throughout the years, and this is one of them. Literally from one day to the next, when this bike came out, it made every downhill machine from the other manufacturers look dull, uninteresting, and antiquated, and it's easy to see why. Every inch of this bike is just exceptional. It was, and arguably still is, the most technologically advanced downhill bike to ever hit the market. And when this thing came out, carbon fiber was still in kind of the early innings of the industry, not mountain biking, but downhill racing and downhill bikes. And while there was certainly carbon fiber downhill bikes like the V10 and the Trek Session, the Demo elevated it. If those two bikes are the kind of supercars, the Demo is the hypercar, the asymmetric one-sided frame that aided in shock access and reduced the weight. Also, it just looked really cool. The beautifully integrated cable routing in the head tube, still one of the better examples of this done. Not even necessarily super commonplace now, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a better version of it on a downhill bike at the time. The incredibly, probably the coolest part of the bike, in my opinion, is the one-piece hollow carbon fiber rocker link. I would be equally stoked just to get this thing and put it on my mantle as I would be mounting it on a downhill bike. The full carbon chainstay and seat stay, as well as the pivot bearing mounted bottom bracket for the chainstay. Just every ounce of this bike was something special. It looked nothing like the predecessor, and it really didn't look like anything else on the market. This thing was awesome. So with all this excitement, all this hype, all the World Cup victories that the bike eventually rode to with Aaron Gwin, Troy Brosnan, and later Loic Bruni, why did it see such a relatively short product cycle of, it was around 4 years. So the bike was sort of showcased in 14. The first production available one was in 2015. And ultimately they ended that design of the Demo in 2018. And the question has to be asked, why was that? This was one of those really kind of viral bikes. It still stands as one of the most unique and lust-worthy downhill bikes in the history of the sport. So why did it come to such an abrupt end? And when I say end, the 2019 redesign of the Demo looked nothing like it. It was pretty clearly a bike that sort of started over from scratch. Very little, if any, of the carbon fiber S-Works Demo carried over into the new one, and we're going to talk about why that is the case. So the first reason that I believe they ultimately moved away from that design with that very sort of strong emphasis in carbon fiber is the lack of adjustability. So in 2016, Specialized signed Loic Bruni, who is regarded as not only one of the greatest racers of all time, but one of the most methodical in terms of bike setup. And here we get into one of the most notable shortcomings of the bike, and that was it had absolutely no adjustability. There was so much time and resources that went into engineering the carbon fiber components of the bike. Every ounce of this bike was carbon. The frame, the rocker link, the chainstay, the seat stay. This is a very laborious and expensive process, and I believe this bike really was an attempt for Specialized to kind of flex their engineering prowess, but unfortunately, the drawback to this approach was there is no way to adjust it. Not that it was impossible, but Specialized just opted not to include any way to adjust anything from chainstay bottom bracket, head angle. There was a alternate shock link later on that was designed in conjunction with the race team that would make it more or less progressive, but that was pretty much it. Now, when you have Loic Bruni on a team that is going to be very insistent on adjusting the bike, on experimenting, that is likely not going to work. And I would say that is the first reason. The second is the change in industry perception regarding carbon. This bike came out in kind of the heyday of carbon in regards to downhill racing, and a big motivating factor in the design criteria was to reduce weight. I've seen versions of this bike literally come in at 33 pounds. You could probably get it even lighter. The production S-Works was around 35 pounds. This thing was feathery light. It was one of the lightest downhill bikes ever. The Trek Session was also an exceptionally light bike. Ultimately, as we went on to learn, weight in downhill racing, at least on the light end of the spectrum, has very little to do with performance in winning races. In fact, we're increasingly noticing that the inverse is true. But what that ended up meaning is the very expensive specialized demo in full carbon, and especially the S-Works, was simply a harder sell. Consumers and racers and many people that buy a downhill bike are racers. If lower weight is not a performance advantage, why are you going to spend thousands of dollars to get that bike lighter? And for Specialized, ultimately to keep the design of the bike, they would have to redesign it pretty significantly, because mullet were obviously coming down the pipeline, as well as a full 29er version. The demo that I actually have, the 2022 version, can run 29 or 27, and you can only imagine the difficulty in trying to accomplish that on a full carbon bike. So that, I would say, is reason 2. And reason 3 is sort of the understanding that, okay, the time and energy that we took in developing this bike, and while it is an engineering masterpiece, ultimately in the world of downhill, that doesn't necessarily translate to performance. And not to be a person that continues to reiterate frameworks and talk about it all the time, but they're a great example. The demo S-Works from 15 to 18 is the exact opposite of frameworks. The engineering marvel that is that carbon chassis is absolutely extraordinary, but is it better than a simpler, easier to manufacture, and even more importantly, easier to adjust aluminum bike? No. And that is one of the reasons, in conjunction with Loic Bruni, that they went the way of aluminum in 2019. It's cheaper to manufacture, it's easier to adjust. When you have Loic Bruni on your team, that is of significant importance. And ultimately, for the end consumer, that carbon fiber Wonder Bike, it's really cool looking, but when you talk about performance, it just doesn't offer that much. The juice is not worth the squeeze. Why do you think Commensal, a company dedicated to aluminum manufacturing, has been so successful? I'm not saying that is the reason. I'm saying it's a good example of what might work and make sense in the world of, for example, road biking, where you're just working with a much simpler criteria in terms of geometry. So it makes sense to invest a ton in this incredible cutting edge, feathery, lightweight bike like the Tarmac or the Trek Madone. In downhill, it doesn't. Racers on the factory team are going to want a bike that they can tinker with and adjust, and the end user is not going to want to pay a $2,000 or $3,000 upcharge for a carbon bike that doesn't offer any performance advantages. Now, with all that being said, this is still one of the coolest bikes out there. You can actually pick them up for relatively cheap. I certainly don't recommend against that. I think that would be a great way to go. Used bikes, this doesn't have anything to do with the video, but used bikes are a great way to get some of these incredible super bikes that back in the day cost $8,000, $9,000, and you can now get it for like $2,000. So this is still one of the coolest bikes. They came out with a couple different iterations in color. They also came out with a aluminum version, but ultimately, as we already know, they decided to change course. But I thought that was kind of interesting. It's a bike that I still would put in my kind of top 10 coolest bikes. I want to hear what you guys think. Are you guys still as captivated by the bike as I am? every time I look at it, I can't help but thinking that is one of the coolest bikes I've ever seen. Anyways, let me know. I hope you enjoyed the video. Do any of you guys have experience riding this bike? Do you have it? Leave a comment and hope you enjoyed the video.